Good morning, good day, good evening, wherever you are. This is Ron from Higher Vista and delivering information about cybersecurity. I am not trying to sell you anything, so I would please give me a thumbs up. This is content that I'm just delivering to share with you. And in particular, our topic today, and by the way, I'm in Flagstaff, Arizona, and I know it's almost May, and I'm wearing a sweater. It gets a little bit chilly here in Flagstaff once in a while. We're up in the mountains, and I love the area. Let's see, CMMC version 2. I wanted to clarify some confusion out there, and thereby bringing you this video. If you want these slides, send me an email. If you have any questions, send me an email. In terms of comments, I will look at comments. However, if somebody's trying to sell you something in the comments, ignore them. It's not me. I'm not here to sell you anything, just give you some good information. Anyway, I wanted to talk about CMMC version 2. I received so many marketing offers doing cybersecurity, and it's kind of embarrassing in a way, because I look at some of these companies and they're some of them are doing a great job at explaining things. Others are just trying to sell you stuff that hasn't been really fully refined and defined yet. So let's talk about CMMC version 2. Now, why would you want to use CMMC? If you are a defense supplier or a manufacturer, you're a sub for a prime, and you're working on items for let's say an F-35, so you're working on a plate that you get powder coated. Great, this is for you. Or if you're just looking for a really good cybersecurity framework that you can use for selling beer and potato chips, CMMC is actually a good model to do that. It's not ready for prime time yet. I'll explain that. We'll talk a bit about the evolution, the rulemaking. There's CFR 32 and 48. That's the rulemaking process. The timeline, again, I'll just say it on the onset. Timeline for CMMC is really about 1.5 or 2 years out, because CMMC, if you don't know this yet, they will ask you to have an audit at the end of it. In other words, it'll be like AS 9100, which is a quality certification. Every 3 years with AS 9100, as a business, you pay an external auditor to come out, review everything you have, and he or she will give you a stamp of approval, and you're good to go for about 3 years. So they're looking at the CMMC. They, the Department of Defense, Congress, etc., are looking at the CMMC in the similar light. Again, it's not ready for prime time, so if you're getting marketing materials that say, hey, you got to be compliant right away, not so. Anyway, I always use the term trust but verify. And if you look through some of the marketing materials, they try to get you that immediate call to action. I want to change the conversation just slightly. There is a call to action, but it's really focused on something else. It's focused on the NIST 800-171r2 right now. So the evolution of CMMC 2.0 in September 2020, not too long ago, DoD published an interim rule for DFARS in the Federal Register. And you can look at that. There's that documentation case 2019 DE 041, which did the initial version was version 1, and that was in 2019. And bottom line, it became such a mess. And I'll explain how it became kind of a mess. In November 30th, 2020, there was a 5-year phase-in period for CMMC, as well as CMMC version 2 came out. So that created a little bit of a confusion with the CMMC, the SP 800-171, and so it became a little bit of a hubbub. So let's dial back a little bit. DFARS is the set of regulations that was derived from FARS, Federal Acquisition regulations that filtered down for defense. Well, the Defense Department's really interested in protecting what they call CUI, Controlled Unclassified Information, and FCI, Federal Contract Information. FCI is, you could say generally speaking, it's things like who's getting the contract. It may have some part numbers in there. It could have some other information that reveals just some general information about who's doing what, that federal contract information, who's doing what part at what time, maybe even some duration, timelines, and deliverable examples. Now, that's roughly speaking. We can get in a whole conversation about FCI. But CUI is likewise. It could be if you're doing that metal plate that needs to be powder coated, it could be the drawings for that. So all those pieces of information, if you're doing recon, if you're an adversary and you're doing recon, you want to pull all these different parts, FCI, CUI from, let's say Raytheon probably has, I know they have hundreds, if not thousands of subcontractors. So if you're Raytheon and you're doing the AMRAAM, tow missiles, other type of components for DoD, you have a lot of people creating grommets, screws, plated parts for your items. So if you're an actor, you want to gather all that information. So DFARS is meant to protect all that information, both the FCI and CUI. So DFARS, what happened is the regulations came through, pitched them over to NIST, National Institute of Science and Technology, and they created some documentation that we can understand in order to comply with the DFARS. So NIST 800-171r2 is now the most current version that is really kind of the hot sweet spot, if you will, for DoD suppliers and manufacturers, the subordinates, if you will, the subs. And so that's kind of how that really works. So CMMC was added because the 171 was self-attestation. So I could be one company, I would look at it and I go, oh, yeah, I'm looking at these 110 controls. Oh, control 361. Oh, I'm pretty close. I'll give myself a yes. Pretty close doesn't really count. But in self-attestation, there's this thing called survey bias. So I might give myself 100%. I'm 100% done. Actually, I've been in manufacturers that have said they're 96 and 98%. After I've walked through them with all the controls, it turned out they were only like 32% done. So there's that survey bias. So what DoD wanted to do is implement CMMC to have that cycle around where they would have external auditors to go ahead and review the 171 just to verify it. Very much like the quality. Somebody externally would come and review your paperwork and say, oh yeah, this is good to go. Or they might say, well, you got some gaps here, fix these up before I give you the rubber stamp for 3 years. That was the whole process. CMMC version 1 was confusing. It was based off of what's called the SEI capability maturity model. And I've worked with this in software development environments. This came out probably, I'm thinking late 80s, but I certainly used it in the 90s for software environments. It had 5 tiers. Carnegie Mellon, SEI, Software Engineering Institute. This is the source of that. MIT, Carnegie Mellon, and I think Johns Hopkins contributed to CMMC version 1, and they did a great job. They used this as a model, 5 steps, and they said, well, we'll have an initial, all the way up to optimizing would be step 5 of CMMC version 1. And it incorporated the controls from NIST 800-171r2 at the time, and they also threw in to the mix CIS controls and some other additional controls, and quite frankly, it became confusing for manufacturers, only because a lot of manufacturers only have 2, 4, 12 employees versus this model, which was geared towards larger development organizations. So it became sort of a pain point for a lot of manufacturers, a lot of fear, a lot of confusion, and adding to that were a lot of people marketing stuff about CMMC version 1 and even version 2. So the intention was, the DoD kind of dialed back and said, what is our intention? Oh, we want to protect our crown jewels, the CUI and FCI. And actually the model can be used to protect things like, other than CUI and FCI, trade secrets. If you're in a business, you might have some intellectual property. You certainly will have your PII, your personal information for your employees that you want to protect. So there's a lot of crown jewels where you want to kind of cloister up and hide. The 171 does a great job in helping you with that. There's other models out there, but I think the 171 is one of those that are sticking with us. If you're, again, a DoD associated organization, you'll definitely want to do the 171. But if you're not, if you're selling beer and potato chips, this is a great model to get started with. CMMC version 2 in March 2021. Bottom line, they mentioned 850 public comments. I have a feeling might be a factor of off by 90% is probably 8,500 people going, what the heck is CMMC version 1? We got 5 tiers. We've got these other items kind of dialing into it. It's driving us crazy, and we only have 4 people in the shop, So what happened is it was too confusing. It's a great model. SEI, Carnegie Mellon, MIT, Johns Hopkins did a fantastic job in that model, but it was not a model to be implemented by mom and pops who were doing a majority of the manufacturing in the U.S. So they needed to dial it back. So the bottom line is They went from 5 steps to 3. And we'll look at those in a second. Bottom line is they're now focused on SP 800-171 for steps 1 and 2, levels 1 and 2, and 800-172 for level 3. So here's the titles of it. 171 is called Protecting Controlled Unclassified Information in Non-Federal Systems and Organizations. So it's not the Raytheons, because they have to apply to something else. Now they have to focus in on 853. It's more like for the subs who are working on the screws and the sheet metal parts and rubber grommets, the mom and pops that really kind of run the show anyway. The 172 is enhanced, so you can look at that as the add-on. And looking at 172, it's really policies, procedures, best practices, as well as more of a reflection, a push forward towards zero trust. And I'll talk about zero trust at a later video. But 171 handles steps, levels 1 and 2 of CMMC version 2. And level 3 is 172, which is kind of, you can look at as all the audit hooks in some regard, and as well. So we'll move on from there. I'll have a further explanation of level 3 at one point. This is just going over CMMC version 2. So here's a 5-tier to 3-tier model. That's bottom line with version 1 to version 2 of CMMC. And I just want to look at this graphic. I grabbed this off of OSD's website, so this is something you can find yourself on OSD's website. On the left-hand side is the 5-tier model. You'll see all the different practices, the controls, if you will, 171. So they're really piling in things into that 5-tier model, CSI, CIS stuff, CSI, as well as some other items in there. So they dialed it back to only 3 levels. People are already kind of comfortable with the 171. So what they did with level 1 is 17 controls or best practices to make, I call them cybersecurity hygiene items. We should even have level 1, even on a home environment, in my opinion. Level 2 is 110 controls, just like the 171 was, and it is. It's all embodied in level 2. So level 1 is 17 of the 110, and then you just dial up to the balance of the 110 controls. Level 3 is embodied in the 800-172, and if you look through the 800-172, after you get done with level 2, look at level 3. It's policies, practices, and a lot of documentation. I would say it's a little more documentation heavy, in my opinion, than, let's say, level 2. In general, here's how they looked at it. Flexible implementation, you really tier up. You start with level 1, you do a gap analysis. I would recommend a gap analysis on all 110 controls, see where you are, and then see out of those 110 controls if you hit the mark on the first 17. If you haven't addressed those items for the first 17 that you didn't get, that way at least you can know you're in level 1, and then start chunking up the balance of the 110 where you have a gap. A reliable assessment, streamlined model. I think it's clearer to have the 3 phases, 3 tiers in version 2 rather than the 5, because they're throwing much more of the cybersecurity controls into CMMC version 1, and it created a lot of consternation and confusion. Rulemaking, again, I want to emphasize with CFR 32 and 48, I have that highlighted. That's still ongoing. In other words, Congress is handling that. I put TBA beside CFR 32 and 48. It's not done. It's still in the oven baking. Congress has not put a final stamp on this. So if you're getting some marketing information that says you got to be CMMC version 2 right now, no, they don't have it all. Matter of fact, the CMMC AB accreditation board that is certifying auditors, that's not fully baked either. So we've got some pilot projects running with CMMC, some accreditation board auditing, some of that pilot work is being done, but it's not hard and fast right now. The only thing that is really baked right now and ready for prime time right now is the NIST SP 800-171r2, which will give you up to levels 1 and 2. And look at the 172, which will then help enhance and bump you up to level 3 of CMMC version 2. Again, version 2 is not fully baked yet. Who knows? They might come in when CFR 32 and 48 get stamped. They might have a version 3. I don't know. So right now, if you're getting marketing material that says you've got to be CMMC, take it with a huge grain of salt right now. Contact me if you have any questions about that. The timeline, again, if you look at Project Spectrum, does a great job at mapping some things out. That's the Department DoD has Project Spectrum. They talk about things like you need to have a POAM. You need to have a system security plan, an SSP. You need to have policies and procedures that all speak to the cybersecurity. You need to have a networking diagram. Of course, all of these items are really items that you really want to keep close. You don't want to post them anywhere or send them in unencrypted email to anybody. You keep it close. So it's SSP, network diagram, policies, procedures, incident reporting, and response plan. That is a big one because that is a very needed item. And if you look at the 800-171, if you're a DoD supplier or manufacturer and you have an incident, you have 72 clock hours to report that. So you might as well get that all dialed in. If you're, again, selling beer and potato chips and want a good security model, you still want to report that. And the reporting mechanisms right now are loosely with CISSP or the FBI, and that's being tightened up as we speak now in general. But if you're a DoD, you'll report to the DIVNet, and in that way, if you have an incident, it gets really spread out and reported, gets put in on certain databases, and we'll talk about that whole process later. But I wanted to give you an idea about the CMMC version 2. Project Spectrum goes into a little bit of the details. Check into that. Some good information with DoD in terms of Project Spectrum. And if you're again, a DoD supplier or a vendor of some sort, that may be a good resource for you. And it's free. I love free stuff. DoD, again, CMMC audits are not occurring except in certain pilot testing instances. So there's not that going on because CMMC 2 has not been solidified yet. Still in the oven baking. So where to start? Again, CMMC level 2 is right now the target, the eventual target. Start with a gap analysis of the 110 controls embodied in 800-171r2. Excuse me, SP 800-171r2. NIST doesn't like me leaving out the SP, so sorry about that, NIST people. My estimation is about 40 to 45% of the 110 controls are technical in nature, whether you're standing up a firewall, setting up VLANs, IP subnets, setting up a SIM, those sort of things. So the 40-45%. The balance is policies, procedures, best practices. So it's not a good idea. It is not a good idea to have just IT working on this. It really needs the whole organization from CEO, CFO, all the way over to IT. Everyone needs to be really involved because 40-45% technical. The balance, policies, procedures, how you handle things, incident response, incident reporting, that involves everyone in the organization. So please keep that in mind. If you have any questions about any of the controls, drop me a note, an email preferably, because I'm doing cybersecurity courses as well as teaching at a university, as well as doing the actual work with vendors, as well as work with suppliers, etc., in helping them through this. So if you have a quick question, I will be glad to point you to resources, and then we can go from there. After you're done with levels 1 and 2, let's say you've got 110 of the SP 800-171r2 controls handled, documented, policies, procedures, incident response plan, you've got all that dialed in. Start looking at the 800-172, and that's enhancements to everything. So, by the way, you want to do this on a cyclical basis. And a lot of manufacturers will dovetail it in with their AS 9100 quality cert. Whenever that spins around annually, they'll redo it, revisit 171 and even 172 in that whole cycle. If you have an incident in between, you're going to have to the best practice, let me put it that way, is to spin through all of the controls and make sure you have everything buttoned up. Okay? And that's really what the incident reporting and response plan is all about. I'll talk about that at a future video. So here's some resources right here. The OSD, I mentioned that for some of the diagrams. You can get the current information about the status of CMMC here. The NIST 800-171r2 is really the primary document. The 172 is the additional step above. So if bottom line, if someone's selling you or trying to sell you the urgency to get CMMC version 2 and buy my XYZ product and training, not ready for prime time, honestly, I think you can probably get started with reviewing the 800-171r2 on your own. And if that gets a little bit confusing. Get some support from, let's say, your local manufacturer extension partner, MEP. Every state has one. I'm in Arizona, so they have an Arizona MEP. I think they're out of the Department of Commerce. California has an MEP, California Manufacturing Technology Consulting. Other states in Puerto Rico, so there's 51 MEPs. Look for that as a free or very limited cost resource to get you started. You may not have to spend the big bucks with a lot of companies that are doing way too much marketing. So anyway, drop me a note. My email, hopefully I put on this last slide right here, ron@hirevista.com, and you can just pop a comment in if you want. I probably won't be as responsive to the comments because I'm also doing other work, but an email, certainly. Drop me any questions, comments, suggestions, complaints, any other items that you want to talk to me about, and love to have a conversation with you about this. So thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate it. If you can give me a thumbs up, that'd be fantastic. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.